She asked me why I cared so much about her son. I couldn't tell her the truth, not with words. But when she opened that photo album, everything I'd hidden for 15 years came crashing down. My name is Sara, and this is the story of how I became a maid in the house that should have been mine, caring for the child I could never claim. Some secrets don't stay buried forever. Some truths find their way to the surface, no matter how deep you bury them. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing. Stories like mine need to be heard, and your support means everything. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The iron gates of the Wellington estate opened with a low, mechanical groan that seemed to echo the anxiety churning in my stomach. I stood there for a moment, my worn leather bag clutched against my chest, staring at the mansion that rose before me like something out of a fairy tale. 3 stories of cream-colored stone, windows that gleamed like diamonds in the afternoon sun, and gardens so perfectly manicured they looked like they'd been painted rather than planted. My name is Sara Mitchell, and I was about to interview for a housemaid position. At least, that's what anyone else would have thought. But I knew the truth. I knew why my hands trembled as I walked up that cobblestone driveway. I knew why I'd spent 3 months tracking down this specific household, this specific family, this specific address. And I knew that the moment I stepped through those grand double doors, I would be walking into the most dangerous decision of my life. The doorbell chimed somewhere deep inside the house, a soft, melodious sound that probably cost more than my entire month's rent. I straightened my navy blue dress, the nicest thing I owned, and tried to steady my breathing. "You can do this, Sara. You've come too far to turn back now." The door opened, and there she stood. Mrs. Claire Wellington was everything I'd imagined and nothing I prepared for. She was probably in her late 30s, with honey blonde hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, wearing a cream silk blouse and pearls that caught the light. But it was her eyes that stopped me. Warm hazel eyes that seemed genuinely kind, not the cold, dismissive gaze I'd expected from someone of her wealth. "You must be Sara," she said, her voice soft and welcoming. "Please, come in." I stepped into the foyer, and my breath caught in my throat. The interior was even more magnificent than the exterior. Marble floors that reflected the light from a crystal chandelier, a grand staircase that curved upward like something from a movie, and the faint scent of vanilla and roses hanging in the air. "Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Wellington," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "Please, call me Claire, and I must say, your resume was quite impressive. You're perhaps overqualified for a housemaid position. Most of our previous staff had much less formal education." There it was, the first test. I'd known my background might raise questions. A woman with a college degree applying to clean houses and cook meals? It didn't add up, and Claire Wellington was clearly intelligent enough to notice. "I've had some personal setbacks," I said carefully, sticking to the story I'd rehearsed 100 times. "Sometimes life doesn't go according to plan. I need stable work, and I take pride in doing any job well, regardless of what it is." Claire studied me for a moment, and I felt naked under her gaze, as if she could see through all my carefully constructed walls to the desperate truth beneath. But then she smiled. "I understand that sentiment more than you might think," she said. "Follow me. I'll show you around the house, and then we can discuss the specifics of the position." As we walked through room after pristine room, a dining area with a table that could seat 20, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a restaurant, Claire explained the daily expectations: cleaning, some cooking, laundry, general household management. The previous maid had left to care for her own family, and they desperately needed someone reliable. But I barely heard the words. My heart was pounding too loudly, drowning out everything else, because I was waiting. waiting for the one thing that had brought me here. And then I heard it. The sound of small feet running down the hallway above us. A child's laughter, bright, innocent, and achingly familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. "Thomas," Claire called up the stairs, a mixture of affection and exasperation in her voice. "Come down here, please. I want you to meet someone." Thomas. I gripped the stair railing to steady myself, my knuckles turning white. This was the moment I'd been dreaming of and dreading in equal measure for 15 years. 15 years of searching, of hoping, of imagining what this would feel like. The footsteps grew closer, and then he appeared at the top of the stairs. My son. He was 8 years old now. I knew because I'd counted every single birthday I'd missed. With dark curly hair that fell over his forehead and eyes the color of warm chocolate. He wore a dinosaur t-shirt and jeans with grass stains on the knees, and there was a smudge of what looked like paint on his cheek. He was beautiful. He was perfect. He was everything I'd lost and everything I'd been looking for. "Thomas, this is Sara. She might be coming to work with us. Can you say hello?" "Hello," he said quietly, peering up at me with those eyes. My eyes, I realized with a shock. The same shape, the same thick lashes, and even the same way one eyebrow rose slightly higher than the other. Could Claire see it? Could she see her son's resemblance to the stranger standing in her foyer? "Hello, Thomas," I said, and I was amazed my voice didn't crack. He gave me a small smile and then looked back at his mother. "Mom, can I go back to my painting? I'm making a dragon." "Of course, sweetheart, but remember to wash your hands before dinner." As he scampered back up the stairs, I felt something break and mend simultaneously inside my chest. He was happy, healthy, loved, everything I'd wanted for him when I'd made the impossible choice 15 years ago. But seeing him in person, being this close, knowing I could reach out and touch him, but never, ever claim him, was torture of the sweetest kind. "He's wonderful," I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said all day. "He is," she agreed, her voice full of maternal pride. "Though he has his challenges. He can be difficult sometimes, anxious. He doesn't warm up to people easily." She paused, then added, "But he seemed to like you. That's unusual." Something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. Was there suspicion there, or just curiosity? "Children have good instincts," I said carefully. We finished the tour and returned to the kitchen, where Claire offered me tea and we discussed salary, days off, and when I could start. The practical details felt surreal, like I was watching someone else negotiate the terms of their employment, not determining how I would spend my days in proximity to the child I'd given up. "I think you'd be an excellent fit for our household, Sara," Claire said, extending her hand. "When can you begin?" "Monday?" I suggested, taking her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. "Monday it is." As I walked back down that long driveway, past the manicured gardens and through those iron gates, I didn't look back. I couldn't, because if I did, I might lose my nerve. I might realize what I was about to do was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I'd ever attempted. I was going to become a maid in the house that should have been mine. I was going to care for the child I could never claim. And somehow, I was going to have to live with the weight of that secret every single day. The gates closed behind me with that same mechanical groan, and I finally allowed myself to cry. Tears of grief, of relief, of a bittersweet joy I had no words for. I had found my son, and now the real challenge would begin.
My first Monday at the Wellington estate began before sunrise. I stood in the small staff quarters behind the main house, a modest but comfortable room that would be mine on the days I stayed overnight, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The uniform Claire had provided hung perfectly. A simple gray dress with a white apron, professional and unassuming. The uniform of invisibility. This is who you are now, I told myself. Not his mother, just the maid. But as I walked through the back entrance into the main house, my heart knew differently. The kitchen was my domain now. I'd arrived early to prepare breakfast, and as I moved through the space, pulling eggs from the refrigerator, slicing fresh fruit, brewing coffee, I felt a strange sense of purpose. Every meal I made, every surface I cleaned, every small act of service was a way of caring for Thomas without being able to hold him. It was maternal love disguised as duty. Good morning. I turned to find Claire in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger like this, more vulnerable, and I felt a pang of guilt. This woman had given my son everything I couldn't. She didn't deserve to be seen as an enemy. Good morning, Mrs. Wellington, I said, quickly composing myself. Coffee's ready, and I'm preparing omelets. How does Thomas like his eggs? Scrambled, please. And Sara, she moved closer, her voice gentle. Call me Claire. We don't stand on too much formality around here, especially in the mornings. Over the next few weeks, I learned the rhythms of the Wellington household. Claire was warmer than I had expected, often joining me in the kitchen for coffee and conversation. Mr. Richard Wellington was rarely home, always traveling for business, she explained with a tight smile that suggested there was more to that story. And Thomas. Thomas became my whole world. I learned that he woke up at 7:15 every morning, that he loved dinosaurs but was terrified of thunderstorms, that he had a small scar on his left knee from falling off his bike last summer. I learned that he struggled in school, that other children sometimes made fun of him for being weird, and that he had nightmares at least twice a week. I learned my son, piece by careful piece. Sara, his small voice came from the kitchen doorway one afternoon about 3 weeks into my employment. I was preparing his after-school snack, apple slices with peanut butter, arranged in a smiley face because I'd noticed he ate better when food was playful. Yes, sweetheart? The endearment slipped out before I could stop it, but Thomas didn't seem to notice. Can you help me with my homework? Mom's on a phone call and I don't understand the math problems. Of course. We sat together at the kitchen table, his workbook spread between us. As I explained the concept of multiplication, I watched his face, the way his nose scrunched when he concentrated, the way he chewed his bottom lip, just like I did. These small genetic echoes were everywhere, invisible to everyone but me. You're really good at explaining things, he said, looking up at me with those chocolate eyes. Better than my tutor. You're a smart boy, I said softly. You just need someone patient enough to help you see it. Something shifted in that moment. Thomas smiled, a real, genuine smile, and scooted his chair closer to mine. And I realized, with both joy and terror, that he was starting to trust me, to need me in ways that went beyond the typical child-staff relationship. But I wasn't the only one noticing. He's quite attached to you, Claire observed one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. Thomas had insisted I read him his bedtime story, and Claire had watched from the doorway as I sat on the edge of his bed, his small hand holding the corner of my apron. He's a wonderful child, I said carefully, scrubbing a plate with more force than necessary. He is. But Sara, Claire paused, and I could feel her eyes on me. He doesn't connect with people easily. It took him months to warm up to his last tutor, and he still barely speaks to his own father. But with you, it was almost immediate. My hands stilled in the soapy water. Perhaps he just needed someone who listens. Perhaps. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken questions. The real turning point came on Thomas's 9th birthday. Clara had planned an elaborate party. Caterers, a magician, decorations that transformed the backyard into a jungle theme. But as the day approached, I watched Thomas growing more anxious, more withdrawn. On the morning of his birthday, I found him crying in his room. "I don't want a big party," he sobbed. "I don't like all those people. They're loud and scary, and nobody really wants to be there anyway." My heart shattered. I knelt beside him, every maternal instinct screaming at me to pull him into my arms. Instead, I gently touched his shoulder. "Would you like to know what I think?" I asked softly. He nodded, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "I think birthdays should be about what makes you happy, not what everyone else expects. What would your perfect birthday look like?" "Just small. Maybe going to the science museum and eating pizza, and maybe—" He looked at me shyly. "Maybe you could come too?" I went to Claire immediately. To my surprise, she listened. Together, we canceled the big party and planned something simpler. But then I made a mistake. A beautiful, terrible mistake. I bought Thomas a gift. It wasn't expensive. I didn't have money for expensive, but I'd noticed him admiring a specific dinosaur encyclopedia at the bookstore weeks ago, pointing out each species with wonder. So I had saved from my meager salary and bought it, wrapping it carefully in blue paper. When he opened it at his small birthday celebration, his face lit up like sunrise. "Sara, this is the one I wanted. How did you know?" "I pay attention," I said simply. But across the table, Claire's expression had changed. She was watching me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. She'd seen something. The way Thomas had opened my gift first, before even hers. The way he'd immediately shown me his favorite pages, sitting close enough that our shoulders touched. The gesture of a mother, not a maid. That night, after Thomas was in bed, Claire found me in the kitchen finishing the dishes. "Sara, can we talk?" My hands trembled, creating small ripples in the dishwater. "Of course." "I've been watching you with Thomas," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The way you look at him, the way you know exactly what he needs before he asks, the way he gravitates toward you like—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Like your magnetic north." "I'm just doing my job." "No." Claire's voice was firm, but not unkind. "You're doing something more than that, and I need to understand what it is." The question was coming. I could feel it building in the air between us like an approaching storm. "Sara," Claire said, her hazel eyes locked on mine, "why do you care so much about my son?" The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the thundering of my heart. This was the moment I'd been dreading, the moment where everything could unravel. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I possibly explain? How could I tell this woman, this good, kind woman who'd given my child a beautiful life, that every smile I drew from Thomas, every scraped knee I bandaged, every nightmare I soothed, was an act of redemption for the choice I'd been forced to make 15 years ago? I started, then stopped. "He's an easy child to care about." "That's not an answer." Claire's voice was gentle but insistent. "There's something you're not telling me, Sara. I can feel it." I said nothing. I couldn't. So I just stood there, frozen while the weight of my secret pressed down on my chest until I could barely breathe. Claire studied me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not anger, but a deep, unsettling curiosity. "I'm going to figure this out," she said quietly. "Whatever you're hiding, Sara, I'm going to find out the truth." The days after Claire's pointed question felt like walking on glass. Every interaction was weighted with unspoken tension. Every glance from her felt like an interrogation. I tried to maintain distance from Thomas, but it was like trying to stop breathing. Unnatural and painful. He noticed immediately. "Sara, why won't you play chess with me anymore?" he asked one afternoon, his voice small and hurt. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," I said, the words slipping out again despite my efforts. "Never. I have a lot of work to do." But the truth was, I was terrified. Terrified that if I let myself get any closer, I'd break entirely. Terrified that Claire was watching my every move, cataloging evidence, building a case. I was right to be afraid. It started with small things. I'd catch Claire going through my references more carefully, making phone calls when she thought I couldn't hear. Once I found her standing in the doorway of the kitchen, just watching me prepare Thomas's lunch, with an expression I couldn't decipher. Something between suspicion and sadness. "Sara," she said one morning, exactly 2 weeks after her question, "I need you to run an errand for me. Take Thomas to his dentist appointment this afternoon. I have something I need to take care of." The way she said it made my stomach drop, but I nodded. Of course. As I drove Thomas to his appointment in Claire's car, she'd insisted I'd take the Mercedes, not call a cab. I tried to memorize everything about this moment. The way he hummed along to the radio, the way his feet didn't quite touch the floor of the back seat, the way he trusted me completely. Because I had a terrible feeling that everything was about to change. When we returned home 3 hours later, the house felt different. The air itself seemed charged, electric. I walked Thomas to the living room where he settled with his dinosaur book, then headed to the kitchen to start dinner. Claire was waiting for me. She sat at the kitchen table, her posture rigid, her hands folded in front of her. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold, red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. And there was something else in her expression. Knowledge. Certainty. "Sit down, Sara." "Mrs. Wellington, Sit down." I'd never heard her use that tone before. I sank into the chair across from her, my legs trembling so badly I wasn't sure they'd support me anyway. For a long moment, Claire just stared at me. Then she spoke, her voice deadly calm. "I hired a private investigator." The words hit me like a physical blow. My vision blurred at the edges. "I know that's a violation of your privacy, and normally I would never do such a thing. But a mother's instinct is a powerful thing, Sara. And my instinct was screaming that something wasn't right, that no one cares for someone else's child the way you care for Thomas unless there's a reason." "Please," I whispered, though I didn't even know what I was begging for. "Sara Mitchell," Claire said, pulling out a manila folder I hadn't noticed on the table. "Born September 3rd, 1989. Attended State University on a full scholarship. Got pregnant at 19 during your sophomore year. Gave birth to a baby boy on March 15th, 15 years ago. Placed him for adoption 3 days later through Hartwell Private Adoption Agency." Each fact was a nail in a coffin, sealing away any hope of denial. "The same agency," Claire continued, tears now sliding down her cheeks, "that we used to adopt our son, our Thomas." The silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 15 years of secrets, of grief, of desperate searching, all laid bare in a manila folder on a kitchen table. "Why?" Claire's voice broke on the word. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you come here pretending to be just a maid when you're—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Because I had no right," I said, my own tears finally falling. "I gave him up, Claire. I signed the papers. I have no legal claim, no parental rights, nothing. I needed to know he was okay. I needed to see him, to be near him, even if he could never know who I was." "How did you find us? Adoptions through Hartwell are sealed." I've been looking for 15 years, I admitted. I hired investigators when I could afford them, followed every lead, searched every database. It took me a decade just to find the agency's name, another 3 years to find someone who worked there who would talk to me, and then 2 more years to track down where you'd moved from your original address. I wiped my eyes with shaking hands. It was never about taking him back, Claire. I just wanted to know he was happy, that I'd made the right choice. And when you saw he was happy, why did you stay? Because being near him, even as just the maid, was better than the emptiness I'd lived with for 15 years. Because every meal I cooked for him, every scraped knee I bandaged, every story I read, those were the moments of motherhood I thought I'd lost forever. I know it was selfish. I know I should have stayed away. But I couldn't. God help me, I just couldn't. Claire stood up abruptly, and I flinched, expecting her to tell me to leave, to never come back, to stay away from her family. Instead, she walked to the window, her back to me, her shoulders shaking. Do you know what the hardest part of being Thomas's mother has been? Watching him struggle and not knowing why, not having his medical history, his genetic background, not knowing if his anxiety is something he inherited or if we're doing something wrong, not being able to answer when he asks why he doesn't look like us. She turned to face me, and the raw pain in her eyes mirrored my own. I love him more than my own life, Sara. He is my son in every way that matters. But sometimes I wonder about the woman who carried him, who gave him life, who loved him enough to let him go. And now here you are, standing in my kitchen, and I don't know whether to thank you or hate you or... Her voice broke entirely. I'd never meant to hurt anyone, I said desperately. Especially not you. You've given him everything I couldn't. You're his mother, Claire. I'm just... What are you, Sara? The question hung between us. Impossible to answer. What was I? Not his mother in any legal or practical sense, not just the maid either. Something else entirely. Something without a name. I don't know, I admitted. I don't know what I am anymore. Claire wiped her eyes and walked back to the table. When she sat down again, there was a new determination in her expression. We need to figure this out. But Sara, I need you to understand something. Thomas is my son. My husband and I are his parents. Whatever happens next, whatever we decide, that doesn't change. Can you accept that? Yes, I said immediately. I never wanted to replace you, Claire, I swear. And you can't tell Thomas. Not yet. Not until we understand what this means, how to handle it. He's too young, too fragile. I understand. Claire nodded slowly, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I should fire you, send you away, protect my family from this complication. My heart stopped. Please. But I won't. She took a shaky breath. Because despite everything, despite the lies and the deception, I've watched you with Thomas, and you genuinely love him. That much is clear. And she paused, he's happier than I've seen him in years, more confident, more settled. He's an incredible child, I whispered. He is, because of both of us, Sara. What I gave him in stability and love, what you gave him in genetics, and she searched for the word, in whatever invisible connection exists between you. What happens now? I asked. Claire looked toward the living room where Thomas was still reading, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shaken his world, then looked back at me. Now, she said quietly, we figure out how 3 people can share one child's life without destroying him in the process.
3 days passed after our confrontation. 3 days of careful normalcy, of pretending everything was fine, while the foundation of our lives had shifted beneath us. Thomas noticed nothing. He was still his cheerful, dinosaur-obsessed self, still asking me to help with homework, still showing me his latest drawings. But between Claire and me,
Everything had changed. We were cautious around each other, polite but distant, like two people learning a new and complicated dance. She didn't fire me, I didn't run away, and we both watched Thomas with a new awareness, her with protective vigilance, me with grateful restraint. It was Sunday afternoon when everything shifted again. "Sara, I need you to help me with something," Claire called from upstairs. Her voice had an odd quality to it, strained, almost breathless. I climbed the stairs to find her standing in the hallway outside a door I'd never seen open before. The attic access. "I have been putting off organizing up there for years," she explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "Richard's family stored boxes up there when we moved in. I thought maybe we could tackle it together." I knew this wasn't really about organizing. This was about something else. A test, perhaps, or an olive branch. Maybe both. "Of course," I said. The attic was dusty and dim, illuminated only by a single bare bulb and the afternoon light filtering through a small window. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, labeled in fading marker. Holiday decorations, old tax documents, Richard's college books. We worked in silence for a while, sorting through forgotten belongings, until Claire pulled down a box from a high shelf. It was smaller than the others, plain and unmarked, and when she opened it, I saw her face go pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What is it?" Instead of answering, she reached into the box and pulled out a leather-bound photo album. Her hands trembled as she opened it, and I moved closer to see what had shaken her so badly. The first photo stole my breath. It was me, 15 years younger, my face fuller, my eyes brighter, sitting in a hospital bed and holding a tiny newborn wrapped in a blue blanket. I was crying in the photo. I remembered that moment with crystalline clarity. But I was also smiling, the complex joy of a mother who knew she was about to lose everything she'd just gained. "This was in the box from the adoption agency," Claire said, her voice hollow. "They gave us a sealed envelope when we adopted Thomas, said it contained his birth mother's information, only to be opened if there was a medical emergency or if he asked when he turned 18. I never opened it. I was too afraid. Afraid of what it might contain, afraid it might change how I felt about him." She turned the page and there were more photos. Me, exhausted but radiant, kissing Thomas's tiny forehead. Me holding his hand, his fingers so small they barely wrapped around my thumb. Me reading to him from a children's book, even though he was only 2 days old. And then there were other photos, ones I'd never seen before. Photos of me walking across a stage in a cap and gown. Photos of me painting in an art studio covered in colors. Photos of me laughing with friends, young and carefree and full of potential. And with each photo, there was a handwritten note in my own handwriting, words I'd written 15 years ago to a son I thought I'd never see again. This is me graduating high school. I was 17 and so scared, but I was determined to go to college, to build a better life. This is me painting. Art was my dream. I wanted to be an art teacher. I wanted to show children how to see beauty in the world. This is me with my best friend, Maya. She's the only person who knew about you. She held my hand through everything. Claire's voice was thick with tears as she read the notes aloud. Then she turned to a page that made us both freeze. It was a letter, written in my handwriting, sealed in a plastic sleeve, dated 3 days after Thomas's birth. "To the parents who will love my son," Claire read, her voice breaking on every word. "My name is Sara Mitchell, and I am 19 years old. I am giving you my baby, my beautiful, perfect boy, because I love him more than I have ever loved anything in my life." I couldn't listen to this. I turned away, pressing my hand against my mouth to hold back the sobs, but Claire continued reading, relentless in her need to understand. "I am not giving him up because I don't want him. I'm giving him up because I want everything for him. I'm giving him up because I'm a sophomore in college with no money, no family support, and no way to give him the life he deserves. My parents disowned me when I got pregnant. They said I was an embarrassment, a failure. They told me to handle it and never speak of it again. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Sara. Keep reading, I said bitterly. You should know it all. The father, Claire's voice dropped to a whisper, was my boyfriend for 2 years. When I told him I was pregnant, he said he wasn't ready to be a father. He transferred to a school across the country 2 weeks later. I haven't heard from him since. The words hung in the dusty attic air, words I'd written in a hospital room, my body still recovering from childbirth, and my heart already breaking from a decision I knew I had to make. Claire continued, I thought about keeping him every day of my pregnancy. I dreamed of ways to make it work, but I did the math. I calculated the cost of childcare, of formula, of diapers. I looked at my bank account and my course load and the scholarships that required me to maintain full-time status, and I realized that if I kept him, I would lose everything: my education, my future, and eventually my ability to give him even the basics. She turned the page, and there were more lines, each one a piece of my shattered heart. I'm not giving him up. I'm giving him a chance to have parents who are ready, who are stable, who can give him everything, parents who will love him as much as I do, parents who will read him bedtime stories and help him with homework and show up to every school play, parents who will never make him feel like a burden or a mistake. Claire was openly crying now, tears dripping on the plastic-covered pages. Please tell him I loved him. Please tell him this was the hardest thing I've ever done. Please tell him that every single day I will wonder about him, what he looks like, what makes him laugh, whether he's happy. And please, if you can, tell him that his birth mother did the only thing she could do to make sure he had the beautiful life he deserved. The letter ended with a single line that broke us both. I hope someday he'll understand that letting go was my way of holding on. Claire closed the album slowly and looked at me with new eyes, not with suspicion or anger, but with a grief that matched my own. You were just a child yourself, she whispered, alone and scared and trying to do the right thing. I was, and every day since then I've wondered if I made the right choice, if I should have fought harder, found a way, and kept him. Until I came here and saw him with you and Richard, and realized that he got exactly what I wanted for him. He got you. Claire stood, still holding the album, and moved toward me. For a moment we just stood there, 2 women connected by one child, separated by circumstance and choice. You gave him to us, she said softly. You gave us the greatest gift of our lives, and you did it even though it destroyed you. It did destroy me, but seeing him now, seeing who he's become with you and Richard, maybe it was worth it. Maybe some pieces of ourselves are meant to be broken so that others can be whole. Claire opened the album again to the first photo, me holding Thomas newborn, my face a mixture of love and loss.
The decision to tell Thomas came 3 weeks after the photo album revelation. 3 weeks of careful conversations between Claire and me, of boundaries drawn and redrawn, of learning to navigate this impossible situation. Richard had returned from his business trip and, after the initial shock, had surprised me with his quiet acceptance. You've been good for Thomas, he'd said simply. That's what matters. But telling a 9-year-old that the maid he'd grown to love was actually the woman who gave birth to him, there was no manual for that. We sat Thomas down on a Saturday afternoon in the living room, Claire and Richard on the couch, me in the chair across from them, and Thomas on the floor with his favorite dinosaur encyclopedia, oblivious to the storm about to break. Thomas, sweetheart, Claire began, her voice gentle but steady, we need to talk to you about something important, about your adoption. He looked up, curious but not alarmed. We'd always been honest about his adoption. It was never a secret. Okay, he said. You know that we adopted you when you were just 3 days old, and you know that your birth mother loved you very much but couldn't take care of you. Yeah? Thomas nodded, still not understanding where this was going.
Claire took a breath. What we didn't know until recently is that we've actually met your birth mother. She's been with us for a while now. I watched Thomas's face, saw the moment comprehension began to dawn. His eyes moved from Claire to Richard to me, then back to Claire. "Sara?" he whispered. "Yes, baby." Claire's voice cracked. "Sara is your birth mother." The silence that followed felt eternal. Thomas just stared at me, his expression cycling through confusion, shock, and something I couldn't quite identify. Then, to everyone's surprise, his eyes filled with tears. "Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you just going to pretend to be the maid forever?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Thomas, I knew something was different. The way you looked at me, the way you knew things without me telling you. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but..." He stood up, his small body trembling. "Why did you leave me? Why did you give me away?" This was the moment I dreaded for 15 years. I slid from the chair to the floor, meeting him at his level. "I didn't leave you because I didn't love you," I said, my voice breaking. "I loved you so much that I wanted you to have everything I couldn't give you. I was 19, Thomas, just a teenager. I had no money, no family to help me, no way to take care of you properly." "But you could have tried." His voice rose, pain and confusion pouring out. "You're right. I could have tried. And we would have lived in poverty, and I would have had to drop out of school, and eventually I wouldn't have been able to feed you or keep you safe. So instead, I made the hardest choice I've ever made. I found you parents who could give you a beautiful home and good food and all the love in the world." I gestured to Claire and Richard. "I gave you to them because they were ready to be the parents you deserved. And Thomas, look at you. Look at the amazing person you're becoming. Would you have had that with me? With a scared teenager who could barely take care of herself?" Thomas was crying harder now, and Claire started to move toward him, but he shocked us all by running to me instead. He collapsed into my arms, sobbing, and I held him for the first time in 15 years, really held him, as a mother holds her child. "I'm sorry," he cried into my shoulder. "I'm sorry you had to do that. I'm sorry you were alone." "Oh, baby," I whispered gently, rocking him, "you have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, even if I couldn't keep you." We stayed like that for a long time, and when I looked up, Claire was crying too. But there was no jealousy in her expression, no resentment, just compassion. Eventually, Thomas pulled back, looking between all of us. "So what happens now? Are you going to take me away?" "No," I said immediately, firmly. "Claire and Richard are your parents, Thomas. That will never change. I'm not here to take you away from them. I'm just grateful I get to know you. Can you still be Sara? Can you still help me with homework and make my snacks? But also, can I know that you're..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Claire stood and came to kneel beside us. "Thomas, what your birth mother and I have decided is this. Sara isn't just our maid, she's family. She'll always be part of your life in whatever way feels right for all of us." "Like I have 3 parents?" he asked tentatively. "Like you have 2 parents and one very special person who loves you in a different but equally important way," Richard clarified gently. Thomas thought about this for a moment, then looked at me with those chocolate eyes, my eyes. "Can I call you Sara, Mom? Just sometimes? When it's just us?" My heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same instant. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, sweetheart." 6 months later. Life didn't become perfect. It became real. I still worked for the Wellingtons, but my role evolved into something harder to define:
part caretaker, part family member, part bridge between past and present. Thomas knew the truth now, and we navigated it together, one day at a time. Some days were hard. Thomas would get angry at me for leaving him, even though he understood why. Other days, he'd seek me out specifically, wanting to know about my pregnancy, about what he was like as a newborn, about the parts of his story only I could tell. One evening, as I was tucking Thomas into bed, he looked up at me with a serious expression. "Sara, Mom," he said quietly. "Yes?" "I'm glad you found me, even if it took 15 years. I kissed his forehead, just like I had when he was 3 days old. "Me too, baby. Me too." As I left his room, Claire was waiting in the hallway. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. She simply squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back. 2 mothers, 1 child, and a love big enough to hold all the complexity, all the pain, all the joy. I'd spent 15 years trying to find my way back to my son, and in the end, I found something I never expected. Not just Thomas, but forgiveness, family, and finally, after so many years of running, a place to call home. Some secrets don't stay buried forever. Some truths find their way to the surface, no matter how deep you bury them. And sometimes, when they do, they don't destroy us. Sometimes they set us free.